Do I fit? So far?
You can sit down if you want to.
Oh, yeah. I might do that. We'll give Barbara a moment. I'm sure she's getting her coffee. And can I move this? We're still in the lesson that has to do with home life. Excuse me for the microphone noise. I had hoped to finish it 2 weeks ago, just so we could stay on schedule and complete the entire book in a timely way. But I think we're spending more time here. We found an opportunity to have discussion in this lesson because of the intrinsic importance of this lesson. We know we cannot overemphasize what Scripture has to say about the principles for a happy home. So that's why we're spending more time here. Let me see. I've marked a couple of places. I just wanted to take note of some things. On page 64 in our workbook, and I hope everyone has a copy. If not, there's an extra one here. We're talking about the duties of the wife. I think, now we did cover this before. I just mentioned quickly. She was designed to be man's helper, the male's helper. In terms of priority of creation, obviously, we take seriously and we take literally the Genesis account of creation. So obviously, as per that account, Adam was first formed. And we know that biblical authors later will say it that way, as in 1 Corinthians chapter, 1 Timothy 2, verses 11 to 15 is one place where that is specifically brought out as a principle. Paul uses that fact as a reason for the priority of the male in terms of leadership in the church, that the woman is not to exercise the authority that is inherent in teaching, and it's not of the teacher. The authority is inherent actually in the book that is being taught. And yet this is a role that's assigned to males in the New Testament and not to females. You know, this causes all kinds of issues today. We'll briefly touch on that a little bit and try to get a perspective on what's happening in our culture and even in the church. Why some of our own brethren are trying to run away from this teaching, are embarrassed by this teaching. But this is what the Bible does say. Genesis 2:18, the woman was made to be the man's helper. Now, someone could quickly say, that doesn't mean the man is not supposed to help his wife, for example. He's not supposed to be kind and good to her and assist her. No, it doesn't mean that. Obviously not. There's a responsibility, there's a mutual love that should be, and respect in the home that should exist. But when the chips are down, it usually will come to, sometimes when there are very important decisions that have to be made, when we're talking about leadership in the home, sometimes there has to be a final decision. It can be made in tandem, that the husband and wife, and even maybe in the case of more mature children, consulting them. If you're talking about, say, a career move or a move to another city, you might want to bring them into it. They might have something to say about it, how they feel. If if all things are equal, should I make this move to another state and take this job or not? Wouldn't hurt to consult, especially your wife as a man. If you're autocratic and say, well, I've made the decision and it doesn't matter what she thinks, that's not a wise approach. It's not a wise approach. It does matter. But in the end, sometimes I hate to say it this way, you may come to loggerheads on some things, and sometimes a decision may just have to be made, and somebody has to cast the deciding vote. So there's leadership in the home in that way, and in the church, the males to do the teaching, but some of our brethren don't like it. Also on page 65, he mentions the wife is commanded to be submissive to her husband. We did talk about that, and we quoted the passages that deal with it, and we looked at a few of the objections. And the woman's ideal role is to bear children. And as we're going to see today, the Lord willing, trying to finish up this lesson, when we get into the book of Proverbs, this is not her exclusive role. She can do other things. She's to be a keeper of the home, page 66, point number 4, and this is to be taught to them. The aged women should teach the younger women this role. So I like the way it says that. It says 1 Timothy 5:4 here, but it's actually 14. 1 Timothy 5:14, if I'm not mistaken. I believe there was a printer's error there. So a woman is to be a guider of the house. So we all have our responsibilities. And as I said a while ago, we just kind of step back and we think, You know, in the last part of the 19th century and the early part of the 20th century, there were some movements, social, political movements, that might have had some merit to an extent. For example, women's suffrage. Now, that's a controversial thing today, and I know Chris probably, if he were here, would perhaps have something to say about that. I've heard him make a few comments, and I know why he's saying. I've heard many of my own family members say it. It was the bane of our culture when that was allowed. But I don't know that that's true. There are a lot of women who vote with their head screwed on straight. They vote from the Bible instead of from their pocketbook. They vote as per principles. They vote life, for example, the question of life, respect for the unborn, and not just vote as per what our family tradition has been. So you've got knuckleheads on both sides of the gender gap. Knuckleheads. You've got knucklehead women and a lot of knucklehead women. You have to, men. Honestly, if it weren't for the knucklehead men making stupid decisions, we wouldn't have a lot of the troubles we have now. But without being too political, we just say, that I think that it was fair to give women the right to vote. And a woman who's working at the same job as a man, if it is the same job exactly, the same job, there's sometimes questions about how you define that. And if she's not at childbearing age to where she's going to miss a lot, many months out of her career, yeah, she should get equal pay for the same experience and education. Those kind of things seem, intuitively right. So you could say a woman's movement for fairness and justice had some merit in the early days, but it was very quickly co-opted by radical elements. And they saw an opportunity, not just to right some wrongs of the past or some perhaps exaggerations or abuses of the past, but they found an opportunity to come in and to fundamentally attack the home arrangement itself as biblically taught, that the very foundation of the family. That's what they decided to attack. And they co-opted these issues because in people's minds, especially in a country that was a Christian nation, like this one was, where people had a conscience about fairness and justice, they could bring in those issues and say, it's not right to treat her that way. Oh, I see. So she should be given this opportunity. Yeah, I see. We would go along with that, and it's incremental. And then she should be able to do everything the man can do. She should be, and then after a while it gets to be absolutely absurd. I remember Judge Bork in his book on slouching towards Gomorrah. Judge Bork obviously was greatly maligned. That's where we get the verb borking somebody in a Senate hearing comes from. You bork them, and you as we have tried to do. Usually the left always tries to do it to conservative justices or those who are thought of as being candidates for the Supreme Court. Bork wrote a lot about social issues and moral questions as well. And from a legal point of view, he was a great legal mind. He deserved to be on the court, but of course, because he was conservative, he was not given that opportunity. But he talks about how when we carry this to the extreme, there comes a point at which you would say, if there's a war and the enemy's at the gate, in fact, they have breached the gates and they're now breaking into the house, who do you want there? Your wife standing there with her sidearm, her knife, or would you rather have the man who may be physically stronger? If you pass out from a fire, you've inhaled smoke, and you're unconscious, and you weigh 250 pounds, like some of us, that's hypothetical, or somewhere around that, and you're passed out, would you want a little petite woman to come in, firefighter woman, to pull you out? Would you rather have some of the big goons on the fire department? He said, now these kinds of questions are just rhetorical. They go without saying. So some of the ideas that women can do anything men can do are just absolutely absurd. But that's the point. They were meant to be, to try to blur the gender distinctions and to destroy the commonsensical distinctions that we see. God-given distinctions, by the way, to blur the roles so you can't tell the difference in the man and the woman in terms of the gender roles in the home, and of course also in the church. It has been picked up by our enlightened brethren, those who are enlightened, who know more than the rest of us because they have gone back to rethink the issue. This is the typical thing you read on their church websites. You can find this. You go to a lot of our congregations, and especially urban areas, but not always. Sometimes the other congregation, but usually it's an urban area. You go to their website and they will say, after many years, our eldership has been rethinking this issue, and now we see there should be gender equality. Well, in one sense, nobody would argue with that in terms of spiritual rights and privileges. There has already always been gender equality. There's not one gospel for the male and another for the female. It's the same gospel for all, the same plan of salvation, the same sin dilemma, and the same solution. And it's only one. But what they mean, we know what they mean. We've been rethinking it. And of course, what they want to do is to keep step with the culture. So the culture's been moving to the far left. They would say, instead of being illuminated, the culture would say, we have awakened from our slumber. So with their absurd grammar, because a lot of them are not noted for their genius anyway, they say we're woke instead of woken, or we have awakened. We have awoken. They are woke. However, that's this year. Next year it'll be something else. It'll be another trendy way of trying to describe themselves. We see the deliberate attack on the home. Now, who would want to do that? Well, ultimately, it's our enemy, who is our greatest enemy and has been from the beginning. Who made the first attack on the first home? Satan. He took the weaker vessel who was able to be deceived. Adam was not deceived. Now, you could say, well, the devil didn't approach him first. Right, but the devil knew who to approach. He knew where the weak point was, at least in that marriage. And so he went to Eve and she was deceived. She fell for it. And Adam also sinned too, so he has his guilt just as well. In fact, he's the federate head in the sense that the buck stops with him. The buck stopped with him, and he's the one who's always blamed for bringing sin into the world because he let that go on. He let that happen, and he participated in it. So the first attack on the first home was by Satan. And since then, since he's immortal in the sense that to this point he's still alive, he's going to be cast into the devil's hell one day. It's designed for him. But to this point, he has remained active in the world, attacking homes. And there's so many easy ways to do that. You can call into question the respective roles. You can say the man should stay at home and send the woman out to be the breadwinner. In a society like this, we have air-conditioned offices and everything's run by electricity. That might be feasible, but in a more primitive society, it's just lunacy, And although you do see a lot of documentaries about how indigenous women in this country stayed home and tilled the gardens, and the men were hunter-gatherers. They went out and hunted and gathered. Probably had a lot of fun on those hunting trips while the women were out hoeing the fields with a rock hoe. Anyway, that may be a character. They did some of the agricultural work too. But the really heavy lifting, I'd like to see a woman drag a moose out of the woods. I mean, sometimes they can, but some women. It's hard even for a lot of men to do that. But my point is this. It's only in an artificial environment like this one, created in a highly technological society, that radical feminism even has a leg to stand on. It can even begin to be accepted. But its purpose is not to right the wrongs of the past. What I'm trying to say is its purpose is to blur the distinctions. Now, that has been carried a step further now with all kinds of gender bending. It wasn't just to destroy the traditional roles in the home of the man as the breadwinner and the man as the leader of the house, the woman to be submissive, and ideally the one who would take care of the house with the children in the house. Not just that. Now it's to blur all distinction. Well, since there are just two sexes or two genders biblically and commonsensically, biologically, so there's just two, and we know that. Everybody knows it. Even the knuckleheads who pretend they don't know, they know that. If you just attack one side, you've attacked the whole arrangement. It's binary, and that's what you do. You say it's not binary. It's not binary. It's not either or. It's not male or female. So that's what they're out to do. So you said the devil is the original hater of the home and decided to destroy it. Of course, infidelity, another favorite way is used. That's been through the centuries to destroy homes. But now with the deliberate blurring of distinctions between the genders, the devil doesn't just do it out of his realm, wherever he is out here in the air, just whisper in our ears. He will do it through agents. We know this is his favorite MO. He even used the snake to start with, so a talking snake. Satan always uses agents, usually human agency, to to accomplish his purpose. You know, Paul says he would transform himself into an angel of light. He would pretend to be a minister of righteousness to bring about his evil plans. So people would listen, they'd think these men are looking out for our best interests religiously when they're not. They are either wittingly or unwittingly. Usually it's unwittingly. They don't realize they're doing the devil's bidding. So you have certain social political movements, as we've mentioned so many times. The Marxists definitely, who even to this day, in 2022, when I was younger in high school, to think we'd still be dealing with these same old goats. We thought they had gone, especially in 1989. I thought in 1989, I thought that all that would be soon laid to rest. I was very optimistic. When I watched on CNN just about every night, this is before Fox rose to prominence, if there was a Fox, maybe about that time or a little bit later, I would see the Goddess of Democracy statue in Tiananmen Square, China, brought out. And these students all gathered around camping out. You remember that? Do we remember it? We have to remember it. Oh, it didn't happen. The Chinese Communist Party tells us today it never happened. It's a figment of your imagination. But it did happen. It did happen. And there were many witnesses, not only the file tapes, the endless tapes from CNN and others. The Australian embassy was right there in Tiananmen Square. And the diplomats from Australia, and back then Australia was kind of a democracy, they deplored what was going on, and they would lie down on their balcony and get secret pictures. The pictures are there. What? Well, they let them for weeks at a time talk about it open. See, the Soviet Union had just collapsed. Communism had fallen. Marxism had been discredited in the former Soviet states, in the former Soviet Union. Ukraine got its independence as it had deserved, and many other nations. So China thought it's our time to get rid of the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party. And I thought the time was right. It's just a matter of days before they fall too. But they were not stupid. They saw what had happened, and they saw by allowing any kind of opening at all, as the former Soviet leaders had done, Yeltsin and others, you would have a possible collapse of the system, so they wouldn't permit it. So June the 4th, I believe it was, not 1989, I think it was, the tanks rolled in. We've seen Tank Man, my favorite hero of the 20th century, the guy standing with a briefcase blocking the Chinese tank from coming in to kill the students. Always thought that there's a courageous man, one individual who's in the right, standing up to power that's in the wrong. Standing up to power. I'm still asking for my kids to get me that for Christmas, to get a copyrighted, if it's got to be copyrighted or whatever, a big picture of Tank Man to hang on my wall. Betty didn't want it. She didn't think it matched our decor. But I like Tank Man. It'll go along with my deer mounts. But they came in and killed 2,500. I mean, slaughtered these students and young people. 2,500. And injured, I think, 10,000. And then they wiped the slate clean. It never happened. Now even in Hong Kong. Way to go, British. Way to go. Yeah, let them have it. They promised you they wouldn't do this till 2050. They promised. They took away now in Hong Kong, they're no longer allowed to meet in the park. I think it's Victory Park or something, and celebrate it with the candles, as they had been doing every year since 1989. No longer permissible. You can't. Tiananmen Square never happened. I talked to a young lady from Faulkner University who was preparing to go to Red China to teach English in the universities. They were looking for English speakers who could go teach English to them so they could learn English and beat us in business and in politics. That's basically the motive. And she wanted to go over there. I said, well, what do you think about things? What if you were to discuss something about Tiananmen Square with them? What? She just graduated. I said, what? I said, Tiananmen Square. Never heard of that. You just graduated from Faulkner? Oh, maybe not. Probably was born when it was or maybe right after it happened. Sad. Let's not forget it. Communism did not die that day. In fact, it kind of got a second wind, as it were. And now the communist Chinese seem to be stronger than ever. And it looks like the Marxists are trying to make a comeback in Putin's territory as well. They deliberately tried to destroy the home. And they're still doing it. And now the Marxists are in our government, every echelon of our government. And they are in both parties, but particularly in one, but they are influential in both major parties and in several other minor parties. So they're tearing down God's design for the home. And we're going back, we're looking at a book that was outlined back in the 50s, 1951 I believe it was, where Brother Brownlow just took his Bible and he was not embarrassed to just read what the Bible says. But some of our brethren are. And it irks me to no end to know that these young elders today, who are the baby boomers, a lot of them, some are even younger than that, and then the boomers, are getting in there and they're making these changes, giving women expanded leadership roles, letting them be preachers, letting them go to school to learn to preach, and even in Tennessee, not far away, in Nashville area, Franklin to be exact, places like that. And I think it's happening in some parts of Atlanta, a couple of congregations there. And we'll see more of that, I fear. Maybe the tide will be turned soon. Maybe some right-thinking elders will come along and muscle out these wrong-thinking elders and preachers and other leaders. It's not just, the elders are there because the congregation kind of tolerates that. So there's sort of guilt to be shared all the way around, I would think.
I know that the Methodist Church, United Methodist Church in Redmond, wanted to bring in a woman preacher, and it split the church. Did you know that?
I had heard something about it. I don't know all the details. I had heard there was a split, and I was not sure who there stood on which side exactly, but then I was led to believe later that the leadership there was kind of taking the more biblical side, which surprised me. I was glad to hear that. But I heard that it happened. So did they go off and form another congregation? Well, I think among United Methodists, this has been an issue for a long time anyway. Across the board, not just in Bremen. They've had to fight these battles a lot. They're considered a mainline denomination. And the mainline denominations have had problems to start with. Their preachers would come out of the seminaries, as they call them, their preacher schools of preacher training. They'd come out with ideas that were contrary to the inspiration of the Bible. That happened many decades earlier. So they denied the Bible's inspired in the sense we accept it, where every word came from God. They thought there might be a lot of legendary material here and there and stuff that we frankly should discard because it's outdated, Well, who decides that? Well, we do. We're smart people. We go to the seminary. We decide what fits our age. So, what we're talking about here, and that is obviously that doesn't coincide with the spirit of the age. So we've got to make some changes, and they did, but they're not alone. Normally, some of the more evangelical churches, as they call it, usually that means churches that do say they believe the Bible is the Word of God, the inerrant Word of God. Some of them are fighting battles. I think Southern Baptists have some tensions. But generally, their leadership has held the line so far, but there's always challenges. There are tuggings within in the wrong direction. I'm not sure. I may be wrong about this. I think Mike Huckabee, he was once in the leadership of the Southern Baptist Convention, later became governor of Arkansas, and now is a personality on Fox. I think he was one of the people earlier when he was in the SBC leadership who might have been moving kind of out toward the center and caused some problems, but I don't know that for sure. I don't know all the details. But in the churches of Christ, we profess to take the Bible as God's Word and be authoritative. And we take it, we read it like it reads. We don't try to add to it or take away from it. We know that God could make Himself plain, and He did make Himself plain. He had every motive to make Himself plain so that we would know what our duties are. And He did that. And there's no reason to rethink an issue that was settled thousands of years ago. It was settled in Scripture. There's nothing to rethink. What they really do is rethinking their commitment to Bible authority. That's what it really amounts to. We've rethought it and we've decided we're not going to be bound by the Bible in the way we used to be. That's old hat. Yes, and it was right. Maybe old, but it's right. So just because it's old, it's ancient, doesn't make it wrong. Many of, even those who are in the secular world, will decry what they call chronological snobbery. And it means just what it sounds like. Chronological snobbery. In other words, we're the people. We're the ones who know everything. Why? Because we're living today. We're in the cutting edge of time. We're living in the present, the here and now. So by definition, since it's new, it's got to be right. Just because it's old doesn't mean it's right. There were a lot of old heresies. Some of them are being recycled and used again under different names. So just because it's old doesn't mean it's right. But just because it's new certainly doesn't mean it's right. And many times it means it's not right, especially if it's a new doctrine. Because it was once given to the saints then, Jude 3. Well, I'm sorry to go off too much on that. We should have stuck to the game plan here more. But I want now to go to talking about the beautiful description of the worthy woman in Proverbs 31, verses 10 to 31. So that's quite a bit to read. Let me open my Bible here. He has a list of the traits that we want to focus on. So we'll read this and we'll try to discuss these traits as time permits. This is one of the most beautiful passages. It is an ennobling, invigorating passage, a passage of great respect for a wife. Verse 10 of Proverbs 31. Who can find a virtuous woman? I have a note saying a wife of valor. I would say a wife of worth. Value probably better. Who could find a valuable woman? For her price is far above rubies. What makes rubies so high in price? Because you find them everywhere in the rocks. Why is a ruby so valuable? It's rare. What is he saying? Somebody says, I don't think he started out on the right foot already. No. You could say that about a man too. I mean, since the majority, apparently according to Jesus' teaching, the majority is heading down the road to destruction. You could say the same thing about a male too. But here he's focusing on women, and this is a beautiful passage. It's not meant to in any way to insult women, but it is to say it's rare. And when you find a woman like that, as I did, I'm so thankful, you keep her and don't let her go. Men, this is to the men. Who can find a virtuous? And to the women, here's a role model to aspire to. Her price is far above rubies. So this is not an insulting thing. It's to extol how wonderful it is. The heart of her husband doth safely trust in her. What do you mean trust in her? To be faithful? Well, yeah. To be chaste or pure? Yeah. And in a time of such rampant impurity. This needs to be brought out again, and it needs to be preached from the pulpits. The heart of her husband doth safely trust in her. But it's not just that she's pure. That goes without saying, I think, here. But so that he shall have no need of spoil. Now, what is spoil? What does an army do? When it spoils another army, what's it doing? We probably could find, in other words, I think verse 11 is translated lack of gain. He does not have lack of gain, have no need of spoil. In other words, he's not going to go hungry. He's got the right wife in place. This woman is going to help him. He's going to be doing okay financially. There'll be food to eat. So he can trust her in that way. She will do him good, verse 12, and not evil. A couple of years after they get married, and then things will change. Is that what it says? No. It says all the days of her life. She will always be dependable. She will do him good and not evil. Well, now that's kind of general. So let's think, what does it mean to do good to your husband? If you're a woman, what does it mean to do good to your husband? Don't everybody speak out at one time. You can raise your hand and or you could speak out. Not anybody else is competing. What does it mean if anybody does good to anybody? There are a lot of ways to answer that. To do good and not to do evil. I mean, we're getting too personal here, aren't we? If we go and talk about application, there may be fights at home we get out of here. I hope not. But
so many ways, like you said, you can answer that. Maybe that's not as involved, but obviously respect. You have to show respect for one another, and when you don't get any respect, you end up like on Dangerfield. That's the road situation.
If you don't have trust.
Yeah. That comes without the trust, like she said.
yeah. Well, that's trust. That's fundamental. I think that's why it was mentioned up front, probably. That's probably the foundation of that right relationship. They trust each other. It's mutual trust. He especially trusts her. And so she won't do him evil. She will do good by him. She won't make fun of him if he hurts his knee. She won't make fun of him. I mean, she wouldn't do that. I'm just kidding. Now, does that just refer to sexual fidelity, or could it be broader than that, to be loyal? If people are bad-mouthing your husband and you're in a group and you hear a bunch of people bad-mouthing, you're going to join and say, yeah, you're right, he's just like this. That's probably not loyalty. Somebody says, well, what if he deserves it? Well, maybe at least be quiet. But no, so she'll do him good. Let's go on and read. Let's see. Our brother says she's worthy of her husband's trust, verse 11. She's loyal to her husband, verses 11 and 12. Now the next verse. Verse 13, she seeketh wool and flax and worketh willingly with her hands. She works. So what we said about the woman's physical weakness doesn't mean she can't do things. She can get a lot done. In fact, she actually keeps the world going, honestly. That's what this is all about. She's industrious rather than indolent. Now that actually goes down to verse 19. Let's read all this, how industrious she is. She seeketh wool and flax and worketh willingly with her hands. She is like the merchant's ships. No, she's not that big. I don't think that's what he means. She's like the merchant ships. She bringeth her food from afar, unless they're stuck in port and the supply chain's broke. But this one's not. This one's working because the right people, I guess, were in charge. She riseth also while it is yet night. Now, I have to say my wife did today. She was getting up early to cook. And giveth meat to her household, and a portion to her maidens. So she has... let's see, the maidens here, I think, would be the maid servants. She gives the maid. I think the word for food is literally prey, P-R-E-Y. And maybe it's kind of allusion to how a mother bird would take care of the baby birds, bringing prey to them. But it's food. That's the proper translation. That's the idea in English. She considereth a field, and she tells her husband it'd be a good idea if he goes negotiates for her. Is that what it says? No. What does it actually say? You'd think all that's being said about the husband's leadership role, the woman's role of subordination or submission. You'd think it would say she has to go consult him, but that's not what it says. This says she considereth the field and buyeth it. Who does the buying? She does. With the fruit of her hands, she planteth a vineyard. Or maybe a vegetable garden. She girdeth her loins with strength and strengtheneth her arms. Well, I don't want a woman like that. Well, yeah, that's not bad to be able to do some things. Men actually do look at that as a noble trait. She perceiveth that her merchandise is good. Now, what does that mean? I would think it would, if she's going to trade, she's going to exchange money in the marketplace. She's careful about what she buys. She's not going to buy a lemon if she can tell it is. Her candle goeth not out by night. She layeth her hands to the spindle, and her hands hold the distaff. What's another translation? What's verse 19 say in the ESV? Proverbs 31:19. Oh, okay. We have a worthy woman who's doing the worthy work of looking up what it says about the worthy woman. Proverbs 31:19.
She puts her hands to the distaff and her hands hold the spindle.
Okay. Well, I'll have to say I'm at a loss. A year or so ago, I did some research on how spindles work, how the ancients made cloth from yarn, from thread. And it's still being done, by the way, in certain parts of the world today, the ancient method. But I really don't remember what the distaff was. I'll have to be honest. Let's see. All we know is that she works hard. It's part of the machine, part of the spindle. And she's working hard. So down to verse 19, it shows she's industrious rather than indolent. What does it mean to be indolent? What's another word? Lazy. Yeah, well, the opposite of indolent would be hardworking. Industrious, hardworking. But if she's indolent, she's probably of the new generation. Why do I say that? What do we keep hearing? I keep hearing everywhere I go, especially since the virus went through. But even prior to that, I think it was already weakening. The foundation was very weak. A new generation's come along not willing to work. Now, this is only anecdotal, so I know I'm very limited, and I have not seen all the young people who do work. I know there are a lot of them. There have to be some out there. But I have seen a lot of them that when I go to a job site, they're on the phone. And they stay on the phone. Well, actually, on the phone, it's usually text all day long. And you ask for help in the office, it's like, hold on. Talking to his girlfriend or whatever. I'm busy. I'm usually sending pictures and things. We've all seen that. And there are older people do it too. Some older people do it too. But it's generally a younger person phenomenon I've seen, and they tell us that we can't fill the slots that are out there to be filled. You can't get help. I shot a beautiful deer last year in Harrison County. It's my favorite of my life, big 10-pointer. And he's still stuck in Phoenix City at the tannery because the one who's supposed to be mounting it in Tallapoosa says, sorry, but nobody's working in the factory to tan that hide. Well, I'd tan their hide anyway. They're not tanning the hide. So it may be at least July now. Maybe you'll get it then. I'll be lucky to get it within the year, and that's unusual. They say the problem is nobody's work. After the virus hit, they had to lay off a lot. Nobody will go back to work. You want to work in a tannery? In taxidermy? But anyway, they're not. And they're not working. Why should they if a socialist system is being established whereby you rob the rich who do work and you give to those who don't work? This worthy woman is not a socialist. I can say that with assurance. She's not a socialist. I was in Cuba where they claim to have socialism or communism. It's not they know it's not full-fledged communism yet. That's on the horizon, but they're working toward it by their socialist system. Talking to a young man named Ephraim. He was a ham radio operator, lived right across the street from some members of the Church of Christ in a place out in the province of La Habana. Since he was a ham radio operator, we were able to work it out for me to keep a schedule. I'm a ham radio operator, and I would get on my radio at home here in Georgia, or where, I think it was in Georgia, even I started that. And I'd talk to Ephraim, and he'd talk to me. We'd communicate on the 20-meter band. And he would pass messages to the brethren. But he also wanted me to introduce me to some of his friends. I think Ernie and a few of them from New Jersey, Cuban-American friends. There's a point to this story. He wanted me to talk to them as well. They get on 20 meters, and they talk to me. And then they asked for my phone number because they knew I had met Ephraim. They've been talking to Ephraim for years. And they called me on the phone one day after we got off the radio. And in privacy, they called and they said, do you know if Ephraim's a communist? I said, well, I never asked him. I was thinking to myself, how did he get his ham radio license in a communist country? I said, I don't know. I said, well, he seemed like a nice guy, they said, but we fear he might be a communist. But we'd hate to think that about him. So I asked him, I was dumb, and I said, Ephraim, your buddies want to know if you're a communist. And he looked at me and he said, well, I'm in Cuba. I said, I know. He said, I have a radio license. He said, one has to do what one has to do. I said, oh, I got it. Well, I understood what he meant. There was a point to this, but as we talked, the point was this. As I talked to Ephraim about his system, he told me many times he went into factories and saw people asleep under desks, spread out on tables and stuff, nothing being done. He said the reason is nobody's incentivized to work. You get paid the same, which is not much, whether you work really hard at the factory or goof off and do nothing. It's a socialist system. All right, I said all that because I was trying to badmouth socialism because I despise Marxism. It's antithetical to everything Christian, and I can't understand how Americans were taken in by it. Anyway, she's not a Marxist. She's industrious. She's not indolent. Okay, verses 15 and also 21. Let's look at verse 15. We also saw she takes care of the family. She takes care of the domestic needs of the family. Now, down in verse 21, we're not going to ignore verse 20 either. She's not afraid of the snow for her household, for all her household are clothed with scarlet. So this tells me she can sew. She's learned the skills from the older women. They taught her how to sew, and however she does it. And we already saw she could use that machine earlier, and she takes care of her family. So she is also charitable. We'll look back at verse 20. She's charitable. She stretcheth out her hand to the poor. Yea, she reacheth forth her hands to the needy. So here's a woman that's not just taking care of her own family. This worthy woman to be emulated today. Well, we men can learn from it too, but these principles are especially applicable to the feminine side. She's not afraid of snow. Verse 22, she adorns herself properly. Now here's where we get into controversy for some of our brethren today who have loose morals. She maketh herself coverings of tapestry. Her clothing is silk and purple. So she's doing pretty well, right? She can adorn herself with nice stuff because she's worked hard for it. Somebody said, I thought the woman's place is in the home. Well, she is. This is the head of the household in the sense, this is the woman guiding her house. When Paul says women are to learn to guide their house, look at how she's involved in it. Now, it doesn't say she's the breadwinner where she brings in all the money that goes into the coffers of the family, but she's involved in the things of buying the field. She pays the bills. Thanks, Betty. She takes care of those things. He doesn't have to worry. In fact, we're going to see the man can kind of take it easy. He's picked the right mate for life. So she's good to people even that are in need. Number 7, verse 23, she adds respectability of her husband. Her husband is known in the gates when he sitteth among the elders of the land. Now the gates is where business for the city would usually be conducted. Even court cases, trials would happen in many small towns. That's where they would do it, at the gate. That's where everything happened in the city. And he's known there. So he might be like on the city council. He's doing well. He's known because what's the old adage we hear all the time? Behind every good man there is... I'm not asking what the comedians say, but I mean, what does the adage say? There's a good woman. That's certainly true. Behind every good woman, Nancy Pelosi, there's a drunk who gets arrested for DUI. Well, you're begging the question to call her a good woman, somebody says. All right, we'll move on to another point then. She's economical rather than extravagant. Now, we already saw she has good clothing. Silk and purple, that's costly stuff. But does she flaunt it? I saw a video about a certain minority the other day who has made $700 million in his business, worked hard, and he was expected to be looking for handouts, but he didn't. He worked hard. He works all his life for what is. He's worked for it. I'm not trying to flaunt my money, and he drove. How many Mercedes did he have? Had several $1 million worth of cars, and the best penthouse Rolls Royce. I'm not flaunting my money, he said. I try to be a common man. Yeah, cars. Just have $40 million. I didn't get $100 million worth of car. So, I mean, I'm making fun of that because she's not like that. She is economical, not extravagant. Verse 24, she maketh fine linen and selleth it, and delivereth girdles unto the merchant. Well, they don't need those anymore, do they? I think, what's verse 3? How's that translated? Verse 24. Sashes, or sashes unto the merchant. So here's a woman, she's working out of the home. And she's industrious. She's economical. Back in verse 16 where I saw she buys a field. When she considers a good field and she plants the field, she actually she's doing good at farm work. Verse 25, strength and honor are her clothing, and she shall rejoice in time to come. So what does she adorn herself with? Strength and honor. Well, also she's modestly adorned as well. Well, I say that, modest apparel covers two basic concepts. It basically is that which is appropriate to the occasion, right? So she doesn't come into the church building in her overalls, all covered in dirt. And if that's all she has, that'd be fine. She comes, but she tries to dress appropriate to the occasion, and she doesn't come in wearing a two-piece bathing suit either. That's not appropriate. It's not appropriate anywhere in a public place where men will lust. It's not appropriate because it would cause lust. So that's another issue that could be discussed here. She dresses up the inward man, verse 25. Strength and honor are her clothing. So that's an inference he draws. Now, how can we call her the inward man? Come right in. How is there an inward man to a woman? Every woman has her inner man. Well, what does the Bible mean by that? The inner. What does man mean in the book of Genesis? What can man mean? God made man in his image. Male and female made he them. How could you make he them too if he's talking about the man? Well, in Genesis, the word man is what? It's comprehensive. It embraces the male and the female. We used to talk about man, mankind, or we talk about man's place in the universe. Today they say, oh, you shouldn't say that, because you might be leaving the woman out. No, you're not. The woman. It's not women, W-O-M-Y-N. That's an absurdity. I mean, that's a political spelling. So obviously she dresses up the inward man, verse 25. We're looking at Proverbs 31, verses 10 to 31, the beautiful description of the worthy woman. Verse 26, he points out, she openeth her mouth with wisdom, and in her tongue is the law of kindness. So two things are brought out here. They're related, but they're not quite the same. First, she's wise, so she knows what to say and when to say it, how to appropriately express the right word at the right time. And she's kind. So she's not one of these bomb throwers who will open her mouth at the wrong moment and set everybody on fire in her home. She looketh well to the ways of her household, and eateth not the bread of idleness. That again goes back to reinforce how hardworking she is. She's not a socialist. She's not indolent. She's industrious. She's busy rather than idle. Has the respect and gratitude of her husband and her children. Verse 28. Her children arise up and call her blessed or happy. She's been blessed and she's happy. Her husband also. That's appropriate, kids. Your mom is blessed, and her husband praiseth her. Many daughters have done virtuously. So this shows that, there are a lot of good women in this world. But this ideal woman here, she excelleth them all. Verse 29. So she fears Jehovah. Verse 30. Favor is deceitful, and beauty is vain. Is she very popular? Is she the most beautiful woman in the world? Well, physically, that's irrelevant. And all this leads to that point. Those things are fleeting and vain anyway. They may be a part of one's youth, but they're quickly gone. But a woman that feareth the Lord, she shall be praised. So it's the inward woman. Give her of the fruit of her hands, and let her own works praise her in the gates. In other words, even she's well known in the courtroom area, the gates of the city where court would take place, or city hall. Those kinds of decisions would be made. This is a beautiful section. In fact, it closes the Proverbs. It's almost the climax of the book of Proverbs. I looked at some material that said earlier that we need to go ahead, I guess, and to adjourn, but it's talking about the number of times women are mentioned in the book of Proverbs. Many times, of course, the mention there is not favorable. There are warnings about some women who are not what they should be. The loose woman, for example, often called the foreign woman, and one who would sell herself for a price for ill-gotten gain. So that's mentioned, and the warning is to the young man to stay away from that kind of woman. To find a good wife and to be kind and be faithful to her and her alone. And so it talks about the role of women and men in the book of Proverbs throughout the wisdom. Proverbs talks about wisdom, which helps us to live a skillful and a successful life at a practical level. Spirituality is not up here in the clouds. For Bible writers, it has very concrete manifestations in our own homes. We see it among ourselves and in our relationships. That's what this book's about. And that's why I say it closes at the end, chapter 31, with the climactic statement of the worthy woman. Now, I wish we had some comments about it. There ought to be comments or questions about this before we do ring the bell. All clear, right?
I was thinking a while ago when you said, you was talking about the rubies,
How rare they are.
precious they were. My mother's name was Ruby, and her mother's name was Pearl. And
There's a reason for that.
That was very, very adequate name for both of them.
Yeah, that is adequate. What is Elizabeth? Is it B? Oh, Betty? Does it mean bee? I thought you looked that up one time. Busy as a bee. I guess that's what. That is good. But it's talking about how rare such a virtuous woman is. Why would a virtuous woman like this described here be so rare? Well, she's almost idealized as almost perfect, but I'm sure any woman who's human, made of flesh, from time to time may not get up early before daylight. She might sleep in or something. It talks about the woman gets up before, but it's still dark, and goes to work in the house. Not a bad idea for all of us to get up early like that and go if we have that kind of work ethic. But it is an ideal, and this is a beautiful passage. Any comments or any questions with any other ones? Now, how do you think this passage would be received if we were to try to put it in the secular marketplace of ideas today, say on a news channel, and discuss this as the ideal role for women today? Well, many of the elites would say, well, what's a woman? We know they're just being disingenuous, they're being silly, they're being political, and it's an absurd political point of view, and we all know that. The Bible clearly defines what a woman is. God made man male and female, and that's the man and the woman. This is brought out throughout Scripture. I've talked about this quite a bit lately. What if we were to go to some of our big city churches of Christ in some places, some of our big city church, thankfully not all, there are many that are towing the line very well. But a few, maybe the women wouldn't like, maybe some of the men wouldn't like it either. Especially those that have rethought the issues, you know, they've rethought it and decided to have an expanded role of woman. But you're not lifting her up. When you take her off this pedestal, you're bringing her down to the level of the man. You're not lifting her up to where she belongs, on the pedestal. And I think that's what the Bible is always trying to do, is to show the way woman should be extolled and on the pedestal. Any more questions or comments while I hobble to the bell? All right, well, thank you.